I'm joined now on the line by Dr. Rupert Read, who is a founding member of Extinction Rebellion, the group behind the protests. Very good morning to you, Rupert.
Good morning.
You'll have noticed this morning that the Home Secretary has said that he wants the full force of the law now to be deployed against the protesters. Have you had the sense so far that the police have gone for a kind of softly approach to some of your colleagues? Because it all seems good-natured.
Well, it's an interesting question. I've spent a lot of time down at Waterloo Bridge and Parliament Square and Oxford Circus, and I've been on the front line, as it were. I've seen the police move in on a lot of my colleagues and comrades. And, you know, when the police are moving in to arrest somebody, they're normally pretty professional and pretty straight-faced. They're not exactly being friendly and putting on their smiles and putting on their dancing steps when they do that. But, you know, a really interesting aspect of this, I think, is that the police have children too. The police have nephews and nieces too. And we do get the impression that quite a lot of the police don't really 100% want to be doing this. They know, as pretty much everybody out there knows, that we actually have right on our side, and that it really is a question of us as a people getting the collective will together to do what needs to be done about this in order to rise to the challenge of history, and in order to do what our children will judge us by if we don't do. Because be absolutely clear about this, John. This is the one issue that is going to define this generation and the next generation. And our children will ask us, if we fail to rise to the challenge on this, if we fail to bring the climate back into line, as it were, they will ask us, why? Why weren't you there? Why didn't you have the courage to actually stand up and be counted and save my future when there was still time?
I think a lot of people are on your side when it comes to your long-term objectives, and a lot of people think what you say is absolutely correct. But I'll tell you what my cab driver said a couple of days ago as I came into work. He said, you know, I'm on the side of these guys, but I just can't understand why, for instance, they're trying to stop public transport, because the future of the country, the future of the world relies surely on less carbon emissions, on us not sitting in cars pumping out fuels, but on us using trains, for instance. So if you're going to try and protest and halt any form of transport, why would you choose a train?
Okay, so there's an answer to that, which is that we were making a symbolic protest in the London Underground network, especially the part of it that serves the City of London. And the reason for that is because, you know, if dangerous climate change lets rip, then we all know what's going to happen. The sea level is going to go on rising and rising. And what it would do, among other things, is it would knock out every single underground system in every single coastal city in the world. In other words, the London Underground would be taken down completely and permanently. What we did is we did a protest, a symbolic protest on one line for a few hours to take down one little part of that network temporarily, just to make this point. And I think that if we can make the point and draw attention to it, and of course that's what we're doing by being able to be on the media with you to discuss it, then we think that's worthwhile.
The other problem, of course, is that Parliament is in recess, so the only politicians who are likely to be inconvenienced are those who happen to live in London, but all the rest of the politicians are off doing constituency work in their constituencies round the country. Your point has been often made, which is that politicians don't take this seriously enough. Wouldn't it have been a much more effective time to have chosen to have this protest when Parliament was sitting?
Well, I want to first pick up on your point that we've tried other means of protest, right? You know, everybody has written to their MPs, everybody has been on a march and so on and so forth, and the situation has become desperate. So that's why we've resorted to these kinds of measures. You know, we're sorry to be inconveniencing people. We're sorry that it's come to this, but it has come to this, and so we're taking the necessary action and being brave enough to stand up and be counted.
So why did you choose the parliamentary recess?
Yeah, so in terms of the timing of the protest, that really has to do partly with the fact that we wanted to pick a time when students and school students were on holiday, so they'd be able to join in the protest. But you know, the other thing, John, is that you say that the parliamentarians aren't there. Well, firstly, of course, they're all noticing. You know, this is on the front of all the newspapers, on the front of all the radio bulletins. So it's not as if this is somehow escaping their attention because they're not there.
But they're not inconvenienced by it.
Well, but the point there is that actually the real target of our protest, the ultimate target, is government. And, you know, government never sleeps. Government is working 24/7 every day of the year. So in that sense, it doesn't matter a fig when we protest. It's all absolutely the same. The government is ultimately the ones who we want to hold to account and to bring to the negotiating table. And remember that if the government agree to negotiate with us, we will stop this rebellion in its tracks, and we will negotiate with them. We will stop the protests. We will take the blockades off the streets if the government agrees to sit down with us in absolute good faith and negotiate with us on how together we can move to a safer climate future.
Ultimately, the United Kingdom could move to the safest possible emissions, as could the whole of the European Union. But the world is not going to be saved unless China is signed up for all of this. And India, if you were to try and run one of these type of protests in China, in the People's Republic, you'd all be coshed by police thugs. Unless you get the Chinese on your side, none of this is going to have any long-term effect, is it?
Well, you're quite right that we're going to solve this ultimately as a species or not at all. So two things about that. Firstly, this is an international rebellion. We're starting it in London because Extinction Rebellion started here, and I'm very proud of that. And it's quite right that we started here. It's quite right that we show leadership. We can't expect the Chinese and the Indians to do their best to reduce their emissions if we don't reduce ours, because we're the ones who've been emitting heavily for hundreds of years and getting the benefit of that.
But when we did that, we didn't know what the long-term consequences of it were.
Now.
I know we do now, but the Chinese are very well aware of what the consequences are, and they show not the slightest interest in adapting their industrial output to take cognizance of this.
Well, that's actually not true, John. They are making some quite serious efforts. They're trying to build what they call an ecological civilization, and they're putting in a lot of renewables. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things they're doing which are also terrible, such as their coal-fired power stations. But we must show leadership on this. We must be the ones to be the first movers. Otherwise, there's no way that we can expect the so-called developing countries to come along with us. And ultimately, part of what is needed here is a better international agreement to replace the Paris Agreement, which does not go far enough to address the causes of the ecological emergency and the climate emergency. And the first steps on that process need to be taken in countries like Britain. And then what we want is for countries around the world and peoples around the world to call on their governments for the right thing to do for further change. You know, people in China are struggling to make their voice heard. But it is possible, even in dictatorial regimes, to do so. Remember what happened in the Arab world a few years ago, the Arab Spring. Everybody said it was impossible for people in countries like Tunisia to rise up and have anything effective change. But they did. It's not possible for dictatorial regimes, actually, to hold on against the prolonged will of their own peoples. And if people around the world say, we want a future, we want our children to be able to live, and it's really quite as simple as that.
Well, you say that, although the
Chinese have a future.
You say that, though the thuggish Chinese regime is doing pretty well at holding on against the will of the people in Tibet and across much of China. But setting that to one aside, I think everybody at home is going to want to know what your plans are for Heathrow today and over the course of the weekend.
Well, obviously, airports are a completely legitimate target in the sense that we all know that the amount of flying that's going on is far, far too much. By the way, it's really important to be clear that the vast majority of flying is done by rich people and business people.
Well, that's not. Hold on a second. That is not strictly true. I mean, I know when you go to, when you go to, sorry,
people take 80% of the flights, John.
When you go to Stansted, for instance, which I do quite often, what you see is long queues of people coming from Eastern Europe who come here to work. Members of the European Union come here to do often quite low-paying jobs and then fly home to see their families. So the idea that every airport and every plane, and I totally accept your point that we need to fly less, but nonetheless the idea that it's the preserve of the wealthy doesn't really stand close scrutiny in the United Kingdom.
Well, it does actually, John, if you look at the facts. Many of those people from Eastern Europe actually take the bus or the coach because it's cheaper. 20% of the people take 80% of the flights. Flying is still largely a preserve of the rich, and flying is absolutely trashing our climate. We need to have a collective solution to this. Extinction Rebellion is not about individual guilt tripping. It's about us all coming together to find intelligent, collective political solutions that can actually work on this. And we all know that the amount of flying that is occurring must be reduced. Now, having said that, I myself think it's not actually the smartest time of all to be targeting Heathrow Airport on Easter weekend when the number of business travellers is less. And one of the things that's important to understand about Extinction Rebellion as we start to get into the details of this is that we are a decentralised movement, and there are internal dissensions within us just as there are within any organisation.
So there's disagreement in your group about the action that's planned for Heathrow over the next couple of days?
Yes, there are some of us who are saying, look, this is not the most intelligent time to target an airport like Heathrow.
Well, I think that's a wise thought, because I think you're going to upset an awful lot of people who are basically sympathetic to your cause, but will just not want the thought that they're going to be stuck for countless hours at Heathrow Airport with children crying who are looking forward to their holidays. Rupert, it's good to talk to you this morning. Thank you for outlining your case.